Hello, my name is Frank Summerjay, and I am a Senior Program Manager with the Azure Global Ecosystem team, and currently a lead on the Blueprint project, which we are going to talk about today. Particularly, we're going to look at the Blueprint automation for the financial services in regulated workloads. To start, I would recommend you go to aka.ms/FSI Blueprint to take a look at the solution and the write-up for it. I'd also point out that this solution was built on the PCI DSS solution, which also can be found in the architectures. The product deployment itself will follow the same path as that solution did, and we'll take a look at the relationship between the two.
As we move forward, it's really important to look at the design, the threat model of a solution. So let's take a quick look at the solution in its current state. So here we're taking a look at the entire solution in its deployed state with the 19 services. And I think it's important to point out what ultimately we're trying to do is provide a SQL Server backend that is serviced by a web service front end. But the key element is all the components required to make this secure is much more complex than most people think about. To successfully take a connection from the internet through the website into the SQL backend requires a lot of considerations on how you encrypt the environment, how you protect all the assets, how you log, and how you design it. So let's take a look at the threat model. Similar to your RA and your reference architecture, you need to have a good, solid understanding of how to do a good threat model for a solution like this. And the best way to do this is to download the copy that we provided. It'll give you an understanding of what the design elements were in threat modeling a solution that's as complex as this particular one that we're taking a look at for our financial services. So at this time, I think the best thing to do is take a look at a quick deployment of the solution. We'll look at all the different components required to deploying this particular scenario. So here we're going to see the deployment of PowerShell command that we're going to execute. And it comes down to one command line. And it's running the deploy and configure Azure resources.ps1 file with a handful of switches that we've enabled, including providing subscription ID information, username and password for the core administrator, what suffix we want to use. It's mainly just a means of setting this up for this particular instance, where if there were any incidences where they would be sent as far as alerts go, and enable SSL to ensure that this is all encrypted. I'd recommend you take a look at the guidance that's on the Git site. That'll explain each one of these controls in much more detail. So here we see the execution and deployment of the script running in PowerShell in our ISC. It will set up, it goes through several stages, and here we see the 7 initial stages, and then once we hit the 8th stage, we actually see the JSON script being opened up, and these are the Azure Resource Management capabilities that are being deployed. Now, we're looking at this in time lapse, so obviously this is going to take a little bit longer when you do deploy it, but it will give you an insight as to where the stages of the deployment are. Here we see the environment now set up, the encryption of the database and the sample database environment being deployed. You see the table records and the keys being generated in Key Vault. One of the key important things here is obviously we want to tokenize everything and make sure it's all protected. And at the end, we see the solution complete and dump you into just a PowerShell complete state at this point. So let's take a look at the results of this activity. And we jump over to our user interface. Here, what we're seeing is all the items that have been successfully deployed inside of the resource manager. And the individual items, again, you see that PCI 0626, which is the resource group that we set up, and all the components associated with it that are deployed in this particular sample instance, including Key Vault, load balancer, all the 19 different services that we spoke about in the initial deployment capability. So what does that look like? As we spoke about earlier, you can actually go ahead and create some information, some dummy information. Here we're actually going to go ahead and create this user one account, fill in all the fields that are required. Even for this demo, there are some required fields. Credit card information provided, the expiry, a CVV, and when we create it, you notice that this registry is encrypted by default. Now let's jump over to the SQL Manager. We want to illustrate here is that we're going to log in as a SQL administrator and go ahead and pull the information for all the records inside the database. With role separation and role-based access management that was enabled, here as you see the SQL administrator being logged in, and when you execute a command, here particularly the command is just a select customer, grab everything. We'll see the results of that. That records are returned, but the data, the credit card information, is still encrypted. We just see system bytes. Azure Security Center deployment, which is our logging and security management solution that we're implementing. Here we see an alert, particularly during the time of this deployment, a SQL injection attack was executed, and we see the results of the SQL injection against the database, which this alert has identified failed. I mean, that was again a key thing of the design of the solution, is to prevent any access of this environment so that these types of attacks would be rebuffed by design. And last thing we do is we jump into the operations suite, take a look at what information is being collected. Likewise, this is something that's configured by the solution. You can take a look at all of the transactions that are being received, both in Key Vault and other capabilities. Here we're taking a look at the logs. This particular log, we ended up seeing some transactions associated with an attempted administrator attack, also equally rebuffed.
So the last value item that we should take a look at in this blueprint is the FFIC diagnostic tool that was aligned with the blueprint. One, you'll take a look at just the basic information that we provide, but more importantly, if you dive into the individual areas, the domains that are inside of here, for instance, information management, you'll see the FFIC alignment for the blueprint and how the controls were defined. Really interesting information if you're trying to figure out what does it take to meet these control compliance issues. You can also see that the workbook will provide great cross-referencing for things like ISO, PCI, and also all the FFIC workbooks if that's an area that you're particularly interested in. Last is the dashboard. We can take a quick look at the dashboard here where we see all the controls of the Azure customer responsibility and the blueprint deployment, and it's all mapped out to provide you an insight into what that shared responsibility element looks like for the control alignments. That wraps up this introduction and look at this blueprint. Hopefully this information was of value to you, and please give me a thumbs up. I always appreciate it. Any feedback is welcome. Thank you very much for your time. Take care.